Monitoring can be, and in very stressed families with a lot of kids, maybe it's pretty easy to forget about the 14-year-old. Low monitoring is a big risk factor for delinquency, as you might guess, but adequate supervision might be protective. What about the peer group? What if you're hanging with kids who are using a lot of drugs versus you start to identify with school more, maybe that protects against the peer influence? How available are drugs in school versus do some schools have zero tolerance or some otherwise fairly stringent anti-drug policies? All the way to communities, can we do something about poverty? Can we put a casino in every corner? Use a Costello example, I'm being tongue-in-cheek. Or do some neighborhoods otherwise with risk factors have a sense of attachment and protection? So as you can see, risk and protective factors can go from almost the genetic all the way to the cultural. That's the point of this slide. Another concept. This is super boring, but it's really important. Is aggressive behavior stable? Are the symptoms of autism stable? Are learning disabilities stable? What do we mean by that? There's two important meanings. Let's start with height. Get us out of the loaded field of mental health. Is height stable? No, because kids grow. But yes, because the tallest 3-year-olds tend to be the tallest 6-year-olds and 9-year-olds and 12-year-olds. Of course, there's that little growth spurt that kind of throws things off. What we usually mean by stability is the rank order. Height is not stable because everybody grows, but the rank order stability of height's really high because if you're tall at age 1, you tend to be tall at age 2. If you're really short at age 1, you tend to be short at age 2. See the difference? It's where you are. Is intelligence stable? Well, you'll know a lot more when you're 10 than when you're 5, but if you measure IQ, kids who score pretty high in IQ at 5 tend to be the highest scores at 10. It's pretty stable because the rank order is preserved. So that's usually what we mean by stability. But the second meaning is, just what I said at the beginning, maybe things change absolutely, not in terms of rank order. So here's an interesting example. Height, as we'll talk about in a few lectures, genes have a lot to do with how tall you are, a real lot to do. But we're all 3.5 inches taller than our great-grandparents. Why is that? Have the genes for height mutated in the 20th century? No, it would take a long time. What's the deal? Probably nutrition, hormones, protein, fat content. What we ingest is pushing our genetic envelope or window, right? So height is, in terms of just how tall you are, is not stable at all. And even though genes have a lot to do with it, things in the environment can make it even less stable. But overall, the tallest now are the tallest later, the medium is now, the medium is later, the shortest now later. Rank order stability can be very high, even though the absolute stability of a trait might not be strong at all. Does that make sense? Think about it, because this will be challenged later in the course. Now, we want to introduce something called heterotypic continuity. So continuity means, can you really see a trend over time? Does this thing, aggressive behavior, stay stable over time? Or does the form of it change? Remember from the first lecture, tantrums, predicting swearing at your preschool teacher, predicting stealing, and then gang membership when you're a teen, and partner violence. The actual behaviors seem very different. But if you say there's something antisocial underlying all of them, it's very stable. That's heterotypic continuity. Stay tuned. We'll be back to that. Right now, homotypic continuity is what? Tantrums, predict tantrums, predict tantrums. Kids who tantrum a lot tend not to tantrum when they're 15. If they are when they're 15, they don't have any friends, right? So you'd say tantruming has low homotypic continuity. But again, the most irritable kids, if you get a lot of other risk factors mixed in there, start to show different forms of antisocial behavior over time that are very stable. That's heterotypic continuity. There's continuity and stability, but not of the particular behavior, of the underlying tendency. Make sense? You with me? It's really important because if we stay focused on tantrums, we'll miss the boat. So what would be heterotypically continuous about something like schizophrenia, which often doesn't emerge until your late teen years? The interesting birthday party studies of Elaine Walker, who got home movies, these are Super 8s back in the day, from families 20, 30 years before their child developed schizophrenia as a teen or a control group who did not. What did the 1-year-olds who developed schizophrenia look like at 1? Their emotions in their face were very confused. They didn't respond to their name too well, although that's more predictive of autism, and they had fine and gross motor difficulties. What does that have to do with schizophrenia at 20? We don't know, but it's heterotypically continuous. Maybe different systems that are coming online in your motor and your emotional sort of subsystems of your body, they're a little bit awry at time 1, and that's what predicts schizophrenia at time 2, not the same symptoms. Heterotypic continuity is vital to what we're talking about. We're going to skip the examples here in the interest of time. Okay, 2 more. We're going to go to the graphic first. What is equifinality? If you've believed everything we've talked about risk factors and protective factors and how hard it is to track people over time, maybe, let's say the outcome is depression. Maybe some people get depression because they inherit genes from their families that make them very responsive to negative events. Other people don't have those genes at all, but they've been maltreated early in life. And other people have had so many failure experiences that they get learned helplessness. 3 different pathways all lead to, at age 20, symptoms of depression you can't tell apart. Different causal processes leading to what we think of as the same outcome. Equifinality. So we'll go back to the definition. It's kind of a branching, kind of a reverse branching. Many different roads can lead to Rome. What else is helpful here? Let's go to multifinality. Now we start with risk factors. Now we start with very difficult temperament when you're 1. Or we start with being seriously maltreated by the time you're 3 or 4. Does everybody with a difficult temperament look the same 20 years later? Does everybody who's maltreated look the same? No. Because of protective factors. Because of other risk factors. So in fact, back to our example of very shy inhibited temperament, the kids who freak out when the strangers and relatives are putting their face inside the crib, there is a tendency for very shy inhibited infants to not like to go to birthday parties when they're 3 and 4 and to be pretty isolated when they're teenagers. But it's not inevitable. Depending on the parenting they get, depending on treatment they get, some may actually, they probably aren't the ones wearing the lampshades at the parties, but they're at least somewhat extroverted. Or they find a small group of friends. So early inhibited temperament might lead to very extreme social phobia, or to some extroversion, or to actually some empathy, because these are people who say, I know what it's like to be overstimulated, I won't do that to anybody else. So multifinality is the fanning out in the other direction. Early risk factors don't always lead to the same outcome. Why? Other risk factors, protective factors. Make sense? So here's the sort of chalk talk on multifinality. The similar or same early trait, early vulnerability might branch out into very different outcomes. Here's an example. You got pretty serious ADHD when you're in 3rd grade. Are you going to drop out of high school and start to use drugs, or are you going to become the CEO of a corporation because you think outside the box? Well, those are both outcomes that occur from people with early ADHD. What does it depend on? Treatment, lack of stigma, opportunity. Multifinality means you've got to take into account much more than just the vulnerability or risk factor. Context matters. And our final point, and we'll take a couple of questions, transaction. Most of the chapters in the book, at some place or another, are going to say, what we really have here is an example of a transactional model. What the heck does that mean? It's reciprocal. The kid was kind of difficult to deal with as an infant. And the parents responded a little bit of fire with fire, which made the kid more feisty, which made the parents more reactive. Those are reciprocal processes, and over time, they spiral into other domains. Now the kid's hell on wheels at school, and the teachers don't know how to handle him. And then the kid starts to affiliate with a deviant peer crowd that does a lot of drugs. Transaction is repeated, reciprocal processes over time that go from A to Z pretty quickly. It's hard to even see where B, C, D, E, and F work, right? Developmental psychopathology doesn't have a lot of straight linear models. A causes B. A might be a risk factor for B, which then in turn invokes an environment that exacerbates A, which then leads to the kid going in other directions and other influences, and you can't draw it with arrows and lines. You need spirals. You need a 3D picture. That's what transaction's talking about. So the example here of fueling delinquency, just to put it in print what I just said, many early risk factors spiraling and adding together over time. Questions on this, questions on stability, questions on equal finality and multifinality, questions on risk factors. If you don't know this stuff now, a lot of the rest of the course is going to be like, what the hell? It doesn't quite pull together. Questions on this? Yes, right here. Yes. Whoops. Let's not get out of the slideshow. Let's go into it. Yeah. That's absolute stability. So I'd probably be easier if I'd flip them around. So the stability we talk about most in the field is rank order. The most intelligent kids tend to stay the most intelligent. The tallest kids tend to stay the tallest. But height changes absolutely with time. What you know changes absolutely with time. So the point is, the rank order may be pretty stable, but the absolute level of the trait may be changing. Make sense? Somebody in front. Yes?
So with risk factors and protective factors, let's say someone has 3 different risk factors and they have 2 protective factors for 2 of those risk factors.
Right.
How often is it that, so if risk factors are, if they multiply,
Right.
you brought the risk factors down to 1.
Right.
Risk factors have different degrees of intensity or...
I wish we didn't have this, and I wish you were up at the board drawing this. This is what we're talking about, right? So we got 3 different risk factors. Risk factor 1 has 2 good protective factors. Risk factor 2 has 2 good protective factors. Risk factor 3 doesn't. But maybe risk factor 3 only contributes 5% of risk. Risk factor 1 contributes 80. So risk factor 3 has that protection. Who cares? Or maybe risk factor 3 is the one that carries all the marbles and all the protection in the world against the first 2 risk factors. This is how complicated it is. That's what transactional pathways look like. We don't really know, and so if you do a study, you say, well, I've got to see if maltreatment is a risk factor. So you study it in isolation. But if you study it in isolation, you never know how much it matters in the context of the other risk and protective factors. So what do you need to do? Find a nation, get permission to study about 1 million live births, follow them for the next 25 years, measuring their home and school every 6 months. It costs $1 trillion. To get all these factors and variables is unfathomable. It's not quite as hard as figuring out the interconnections of the brain, which is what Obama's big goal is, the trillions of synapses, but it's close. What we have is this field of developmental psychopathology. It's off to a good start. It just celebrated its 30th birthday, but it's still kind of an infant because we don't have the data to take into account all of these risk factors over time and the protection. Over here. How can you rank order a trait like shyness? Well, that's a good point. Maybe it's really hard to show homotypic continuity because shyness in that infant looks different from shyness at the senior prom, right? Shyness in the infant is, oh my God, get your face out of the crib, my cortisol's going wacky. Shyness at the prom is, I'll go into a corner and get out my device and hope nobody talks to me. Is that homotypic or heterotypic continuity? Depends on how you measure the construct. So that's another complication in the field, is defining what we mean as the same trait over time. I mean, what's another problem in the field? I'm really good at measuring aggressive behavior, and I'm counting the number of times 1 and 2-year-olds grab toys from another. And again, these 1 and 2-year-olds are the most aggressive kids on the planet, just in terms of frequency. And then I've got the 19-year-old who takes 1 gunshot at a subway station or a school. Which is more violent? Tens of thousands of single acts, or 1 act with a violent weapon? It's not just frequency, it's intensity, it's consequences. Hard to measure this stuff. Who else? Right here. Homotypic continuity would be real stability of that second definition. This predicts this, predicts this. But heterotypic continuity, if there's some underlying tendency that's really stable, but the forms of it change over time, that would be maybe rank order stability, but we'd have to change what we mean at each age of what we're measuring to know if it was stable or not. If you're a little bit confused by this, good. If it were all clear, you'd write the next edition of the textbook, or I'd say you probably aren't grasping how difficult it is. But what's cool about it is, if you're interested, and again, some of you are going to go on into genomics, proteomics, some of you are going to go into school social work, some of you are going to go into medicine, some of you are going to go and do whatever you're going to do, but you're going to have kids or no kids, and many of you are going to work with kids, and these concepts will actually help you get beneath the surface to think about what you're doing in the clinic, in the school. If you don't have some knowledge of these risk and protective factors, it's easy to follow a manual and say, well, I'm supposed to do this with these kids, but what are you really up to? And on that note, we can end 4 minutes early. See you next time.